Memories are an interesting thing because even though everybody has them, at the end of the day they are still unique to each and every person. Which is why I find it interesting that whenever memory is the main subject of a film, very rarely do you see the film going out of its way to properly capture that emotional and personal connection that people have with those memories. And for reference, I'm not talking about flashbacks that appear every once in a while throughout a film. 9 out of 10 times a flashback is used as a thing to progress the story or to showcase a specific bit of information that wasn't important earlier but is important now. And whenever a flashback is used in a film to showcase a specific time or a specific feeling that was felt with somebody or something at a time in their past, it is always used very sparingly and isn't necessarily the main focus of the film. It's just there to add an extra layer of emotion or drama to a specific situation and isn't the key driving point of the film that it is a part of. Now, most of the time, whenever memory is used within a film, it is mostly within the action and thriller genre. The amount of times I've seen a film where the premise is a guy has lost his memory and he's trying to get it back, I've seen it done way too many times. And even when it is done well, with films like The Bourne Identity or Memento, even then it still lacks that feeling of connection between the personal and emotional effects memories can have on people. Now, this approach does work in terms of the story. It's a good driving force of the narrative. And let's take The Bourne Identity, for example. It really does work in making you root for the protagonist trying to piece together the past that he has lost. It is good in that sense, but like I mentioned, it doesn't really do much in terms of making you feel on a personal and emotional level what those memories were and how effective and impactful they were to the person. Now, it's not to say that every film does it this way, but most films within those genres stick to that. Every now and then, though, you do get a film that does focus on the personal effects of memories, and when they are done right, they are done really well. The best example that comes to mind is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Even though memory is one of the core premises of the film and it is part of the story, it does a really good job, especially in terms of using the visual medium of filmmaking to really hit home in terms of how memory affects the individual and what it means to that person. Even a film like Michael Haneke's Cache does a really good job of showing you what misremembering the past can have in terms of an effect on the present. And even though you don't necessarily see the memories of the characters in the film, it's more the after effects and the impact that has on the relationships you have with people in the present that really makes that film work for that reason. However, the film I want to specifically focus on for this topic, and is probably the best example of it I've ever seen, is Charlotte Wells' directorial debut Aftersun from this year. Now, before I go any further, if you have not seen Aftersun, please go and watch the film first before I go into a bit more detail about how the film tackles memory from a specific person's point of view. Please go and watch the film. It is absolutely incredible and is one of the best films of the year. If you want to watch this video before watching Aftersun, that's totally fine, but I will warn you now, the impact of the film probably might not be the same as if you were watching it for the first time, so you have been warned. Aftersun is one of those films that sits with you long after you've seen it. There's a lot to take away from the film, but there's also a lot in terms of how it is presented that might not necessarily be the clearest on a first viewing, and it's only after you've sat on it for a while and maybe seen it a couple of times. When I went into this film, I was expecting it to be, a pretty standard, straightforward drama that is presented in a fairly typical manner. However, if you have seen Aftersun, you will know that the presentation of the film is a little bit unorthodox, and it really does work in terms of capturing that disorienting feel that Sophie has when trying to remember that summer with her dad. The way I think the film works is like this. All the films that you get of Frankie Corio and Paul Mescal, presented as normal, is the past as it happened. All the camcorder stuff that is scattered throughout the film is, again, as it's happening. It's older Sophie watching back the camcorder footage, which again is kind of made clear by the end of the film that she is sitting there in her apartment just watching these camcorder clips back. So it's made quite cut and dry that these two parts of the film are as they happened. That's what happened in the past, and this is what's happening in the present as presented. However, it's when we get to the aspect of the film that is set in what I can best describe as a rave that things start to get a little bit ambiguous. And what I think that part of the film is the aspect of memory that connects the whole film together. Because during these scenes in the rave that's in the void, Sophie starts to see her dad again, but those glimpses of her dad are intermittent, broken up, and start to fade as the film goes on. Which is a thing that everyone feels when someone they know or love passes away. The longer the time period gets between that person passing, the more you try to remember them, but you can realise in your head that their memory is starting to fade slightly. I think those scenes in the rave are meant to represent her in the present and those fleeting memories of her dad that she still has, and the fact that they are fading away over time. And this is reinforced by the fact that the final shot of the film is Sophie's dad in silence at the airport, turning around, going through a pair of double doors that lead to the rave. Him standing there at the airport in silence with the camcorder is the last time she saw her dad in person and never saw him again after that. So the fact that he turns around and goes into that weird void rave space, again, proves that point that that's the last time, that is the last memory she distinctly has of him. Once he goes into that void, obviously once he's killed himself, that's when he becomes just a memory. And as I mentioned before, over time, the more time that passes between someone you love dying, those memories start to get more faded and disjointed. And even though you don't want to let go of those memories, they're going to fade whether you like it or not. And I think this can also be proved by the fact that every now and then, outside of the rave scenes, you get a few points throughout the film where certain experimental things are introduced into the mix. They might be very subtle or they might be very obvious, but personally I think whenever an experimental element is introduced into the film, even if it is just for a single moment, that again is Sophie not necessarily remembering something, but more trying to piece together stuff in her head, hence why it is slightly exaggerated. The best example I have of this is the scene where Sophie goes off and does her own thing, and her dad is just kind of wandering the streets and just walks straight into the ocean, and once he has done that, the sound of the waves just gets louder and louder to a bit of an unrealistic point. Now, when you think about that in the context of the film, that is probably the point where Sophie's dad killed himself after he said goodbye to her at the airport. However, in the film, there is always this sense of dread that something bad's going to happen, whether it's to Sophie or her dad. There is a point about halfway through the film where this kind of brooding undertone happens and you feel like something bad is going to happen. However, and even though you have a good idea that it's probably going to be the dad killing himself, it's never made abundantly clear what happened or how he killed himself. So the fact that there is an experimental element in that moment, that being the sound of the waves getting louder and louder, again, I think this is just my interpretation anyway, but I think Sophie presuming that's how he went, therefore it's slightly exaggerated. I might be completely wrong, and that's what film is there for. People can have different opinions and different perspectives on things, but in terms of the theme of memory that is within the film, that's just my take on it. And there are many other aspects to this film that add to that sense of nostalgia that again enhances the theme of memory that is at the core of this film. You have the 90s soundtrack that appears every now and then. That's again mainly because the scenes of them on holiday is set during the 90s, of course. But again, even the camcorder footage adds that very nostalgic feel to the film, and most people my age or that were alive during the 90s captured memories through those sorts of camcorders, which again is a good way of visually showing memories on screen, because that's technically what they are. They're memories captured in a device, but it's also a good way of showing the passage of time as well, especially in the context of this film. If you've seen Aftersun, let me know what you thought of the film in the comments below, as well as just generally about the concept of memory in film as well, because I think it really is untapped potential, and it's only when you get films like Aftersun or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind that really delve into that emotional and personal aspect of memories that you get a film that really works in trying to connect with its audience through the medium of film and presenting memories. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.